Hello, good evening. The River Thames has been transformed by a spectacle not seen for centuries as more than 1,000 boats joined the royal pageant to mark the Queen's Diamond Jubilee. Hundreds of thousands of people turned to the riverbanks into a sea of red, white and blue as they cheered the royal barge. David Cameron said not even the wind and rain had dampened people's spirits. Our royal correspondent, Nicholas Witchell, has more.
It is the river which has been at the heart of the nation's life since London was created. And today the Thames provided the setting for this tribute to the nation's monarch. The Queen has seen many spectacular sights in the 60 years of her reign, but never anything quite such as this on the Thames. A flotilla of 1,000 vessels, led on their 7-mile passage downriver by man-powered boats. The flagship, Gloriana, being helped on its way by the Olympic multi-gold medalist Sir Steve Redgrave, and following along behind, gondoliers from Venice and Maori canoeists from New Zealand. The Queen was aboard a river cruiser transformed for the occasion into a royal barge. Watching the pageant with her, Prince William and the Duchess of Cambridge and Prince Harry. Other members of the royal family were on other vessels, Princess Beatrice and Eugenie, with their father, the Duke of York. Also afloat on the river, the Middleton family, mother and father, and Kate's sister Pippa. Slowly, the flotilla swept downriver, navigating river currents which can often be difficult and dangerous, past the Houses of Parliament and the London Eye. Behind the man-powered vessels came boats of all shapes and sizes with all sorts of cargoes. Among them, some of the Dunkirk little ships with their echoes of service and self-sacrifice from the Second World War. And then something you wouldn't really expect to see on the Thames, a horse. A wooden puppet horse, to be precise, from the award-winning play War Horse on the roof of the National Theatre. Not surprisingly, this was something that caught the Queen's eye. By now, the man-powered vessels were approaching Tower Bridge. The royal barge was making its way rather carefully under the Millennium Footbridge. It seemed rather a tight squeeze as the vessel headed on downriver.
It's taken nearly 3 years to plan all of this. The weather hasn't really cooperated. The rain is coming down fairly steadily now. But in a funny kind of a way, it's made the whole event even more British.
People quite simply carried on regardless.
You know, we're British, we queue in the rain from 6 o'clock in the morning and we stand here watching thousands of ships go by and just to support our Queen and say thank you for being an amazing, amazing monarch. Yeah.
Votes, not votes! Votes, not votes!
Offering a contrary view, a group of anti-monarchists, about 100 of them gathered by City Hall to express their opposition to the monarchy. By now the weather had really closed in. The hundreds of thousands who'd lined the Thames to show their support and express their gratitude were getting drenched. But there was a pageant to conclude, and it was finale time. It hadn't quite been the show that it might have been. The weather had put paid to that. But the warmth and sentiment that was evident along the River Thames had been very real. The pageant kept calm and carried on. And for once, it wasn't just Elizabeth II who reigned over us. Nicholas Witchell, BBC News, at Tower Bridge.
Maddie Savage has been at West India Dock, where some of the boats are mooring for the night.
Now, the boats are going to disperse here. That means that they're going on their separate ways. Some people will be sleeping on their boats here tonight, some staying in hotels, others going back along the River Thames to park their boats elsewhere or even travelling to other parts of the country. But one family who are with me now to tell us their story is the Laverick family. Peter Laverick at the head, your boat Verity just behind us. First of all, tell us how the day was for you.
Oh, it's stunning. It's a once-in-a-lifetime experience. It's never going to happen again.
And what could you see from where you were?
what stunned me was the massive number of people on the banks. It was great, absolutely marvellous. They were, I don't know how many deep, you couldn't tell from the river. The rooftops and the balconies, the tops of churches, everywhere. People all over the place. It was a stunning event. And the Queen, at the end, just actually standing on HMS President, still in the pouring rain and still smiling. Oh, it's terrific. Absolutely stunning day. I'll never forget it.
And Peter, as we were saying, this is your boat. This is your wife, Elaine. Tell us the story about how Peter acquired this boat.
I had surgery on my shoulder and then had to be readmitted to hospital. And he kept coming to the hospital. I was kept in for about 5 days. And he kept coming to the hospital saying, well, I've got to go. I've got to go. And when he collected me, he said, I think we may have bought a boat. And what he was doing was bidding online for this boat while I was in hospital. So I was conveniently out of the way. And I think it was a conspiracy. They put me, because a friend of my son-in-law's did the surgery, and I'm sure that they conspired to put me...
Well, we'll leave that to the family. But actually, Elaine, you weren't on the boat. You were elsewhere on another boat.
Yes, I was rowing, and it was fantastic being among all the rowing boats. We were at the head of the procession, and there were just so many boats, so many flags. It was just an amazing sight, and the banks was full of people, and the noise and the shouting.
You're clearly very cold and very much deserve some rest. We really appreciate you talking to us. And these little ones down here, James and Emily. James, what did you see? Motorboats and a very famous lady. Oh, you can see motorbikes now. You know, that's how we're broadcasting from a bike. It's amazing what you can do these days. And Helen, what's going to happen now to your family?
Quite frankly, we're going to go home, get warm and get dry.
And Peter, what's happening to the boat?
Well, the boat stays here tonight, and then tomorrow we're going to go all the way back up to Windsor. It'll take about 12 hours, I reckon, starting at 10 o'clock in the morning, so hopefully we'll be there by dark tomorrow.
Brilliant. Well, while these guys get warm and dry, there are parties starting to happen a little bit further down the river. This area has been really regenerated in the past couple of decades, so lots of luxury flats, restaurants and bars where people are planning to party the night away.
Maddie Savage reporting there. Well, one man who can breathe a sigh of relief as the pageant passed without too many nautical problems is Richard Everett, the Chief Executive of the Port of London Authority. My colleague Emily Maitland spoke to him a little earlier.
I think we're very, very pleased with the pageant itself. Now we're into the dispersal phase, which has been a bit more challenging because of the weather, and the pageant overran a wee bit, but that's going well. I understand. I've just been talking to the teams, and yeah, generally it's been more challenging, as it were, getting.
There was a moment when you thought things might have to be properly adapted because of the speed of the wind.
Yeah.
What alterations, if any, did you have to make?
Well, that would have. We didn't have to in the end. Because the wind was relatively benign as the pageant started. The concern was that particularly the kayakers might not be able to come out in those conditions. But
was it much harder for those? I mean, you don't really get a sense, even watching from this view, of just how much effort is going into something like that for the rowers, for the kayakers, you know, the gondoliers. That makes it much harder, does it?
Yeah, and they've had the wind against them pretty well the whole way because it was an easterly wind. They had no tide because the barrier was in, which was a plus in many ways. But
now, explain to us, because this is something that not many people be aware of. You actually control the speed of the tide by putting the barrier down, is that right?
Yes, the barrier, well, we don't put the barrier down. The Environment Agency were doing their annual test today, which was very convenient. But essentially, there is no tide running at the moment because the barrier is still there.
So 4 knots, is that right, is the maximum?
That's what it would normally do.
Right.
On a normal tide, it would be running at 4 knots.
And the extraordinary thing is, you couldn't really have done a dress rehearsal for anything like this, right? So a lot is left to chance. I mean, how carefully are the boat positions sort of diagrammed and laid out?
Very comprehensive charts of where the boats are and the times they're going to be through the bridges. The rehearsals, and many rehearsals were done with the tide, so more difficult conditions for the boat operators.
Yeah.
So these conditions with no tide made it a lot easier for them.
Well, London's Battersea Park is just one of the venues where crowds gathered to join in the celebrations. In fact, hundreds of people queued in the rain to get in. And Lorna Gordon spent the day with them as they tried to catch a glimpse of the Queen.
They came early and came prepared. Friends and families determined to be part of the big day.
How can we miss today? You know, we wanted to get a really good spot, so we knew we had to get up early. We knew we had to invest in some waiting and queuing, didn't we?
Yeah, I think it's good because our family's really royal.
I'm a bit tired, but it's all worth it because I can't wait to see the Queen, and I think she's very good at being Queen.
We all admire the Queen, so 60 years in the same job, it deserves to be rewarded.
And when the gates opened, first a trickle, then a rush of people keen to secure the best views. Chairs and blankets marking their spots.
Jubilee! We're all really excited. We all came down for the other two Jubilees. This is my third one. I've done the silver, I've done the gold, we're on the diamond. So we're waiting for another good 10 years and we'll do the next one.
Along the Thames, the banks and bridges taken over, and then a sea of waving flags when the Queen came into sight, and cheers.
It's really cool because seeing all of the gold and all of the guns and that, it made it look really cool.
This is the first royal occasion I've been to. I think it must have taken about 60 years to plan. It's incredible tribute. Such an effort that everyone's gone to.
In places, the crowd was 10 deep. People grabbing any vantage point they could as the boats began to appear.
We've got sort of a 3-day plan.
Yeah.
We're going to make the most of everything. We're going to go to Buckingham on Tuesday. We want to see it all.
When I saw the Queen, I felt so excited. It's like I've never seen this before. It was quite exciting to see her in the driver's seat of the boat. It's really quite good, yeah.
Telescopes, periscopes and cameras capturing this historic river pageant. And for those not able to get close to the water, there were other ways of joining in.
Well, the Queen has now passed, but there are still hundreds of boats to go, and every single one of those boats gets a cheer.
The crowd enthusiastic, good-natured and patriotic. An outpouring of affection along this famous and familiar river, lined with people joining together to salute the Queen. Lorna Gordon, BBC News, Battersea Park.
Well, the celebrations are not just in London. Many thousands are holding their own street parties. In fact, there were over 9,500 road closure applications submitted for England and Wales alone. Our correspondent Chris Buckler reports from a big Jubilee lunch in North Yorkshire.
Across the UK, it had been planned that this day of celebration would bring a nation and neighbours together. But to mark the Queen's Diamond Jubilee, people had to battle another great British tradition: the summer weather.
I'm so glad that people have been put off by the rain. People have been baking for weeks by the looks of it, and they've really taken on the red, white and blue thing.
60 years ago in Albion Avenue in York, they held a street party to celebrate the coronation. Sylvia and Michael Fillingham were among the crowd then. And 6 decades on, they were back in the same place in honour of the same monarch.
Coming out today and seeing what's gone on in the whole country, I just think it just tells people what we are and what we do in Britain.
Here, as in so many streets across the country, there was an open invitation. This event about the community as well as the monarchy.
So what do you think they're making of this party? Are you enjoying it?
I think they're having a blast. I think they look like they're really enjoying it. I think they're a little bit wet, maybe, but...
People went out of their way to make this day feel special. This pub in Leicestershire was relaunched as a ship in tribute to Her Majesty. But big lunches planned for some streets were threatened by the weather. Not that it stopped the festivities here in Birmingham. They just moved them indoors.
We decided yesterday at 2 o'clock that the weather was going to be awful and we needed to move in from the street to the house. And unfortunately, it is my house, and here we are.
Others made similar decisions. In Anglesey, what was to have been a beach party was held instead in the village hall. Although the sun did shine in some places, including parts of Scotland, where the tables were laid out for people to come together over a good Jubilee lunch.
There have been quite a few odd sights, but in town centres, villages and individual streets, people have gone to a huge effort to prepare for today. And the flags may have got wet, but that didn't dampen the atmosphere.
People will be watching the forecast, however, because the long weekend of events has only begun. Chris Buckler, BBC News, York.
Royal barge. Watching the pageant with her, Prince William and the Duchess of Cambridge and Prince Harry. Other members of the royal family were on other vessels. Princess Beatrice and Eugenie with their father, the Duke of York. Also afloat on the river, the Middleton family, mother and father, and Kate's sister Pippa. Slowly the flotilla swept downriver, navigating river currents which can often be difficult and dangerous, past the Houses of Parliament and the London Eye. Behind the man-powered vessels came boats of all shapes and sizes with all sorts of cargoes. Among them some of the Dunkirk little ships with their echoes of service and self-sacrifice from the Second World War.
Hello, good evening. The River Thames has been transformed by a spectacle not seen for centuries as more than 1,000 boats joined the royal pageant to mark the Queen's Diamond Jubilee. Hundreds of thousands of people turned to the riverbanks into a sea of red, white and blue as they cheered the royal barge.
A flotilla of 1,000 vessels, led on their 7-mile passage downriver by man-powered boats. The flagship, Gloriana, being helped on its way by the Olympic multi-gold medalist Sir Steve Redgrave, and following along behind, gondoliers from Venice and Maori canoeists from New Zealand. The Queen was aboard a river cruiser transformed for the occasion into a royal.
David Cameron said not even the wind and rain had dampened people's spirits. Our royal correspondent, Nicholas Witchell, has more.
It is the river which has been at the heart of the nation's life since London was created. And today the Thames provided the setting for this tribute to the nation's monarch. The Queen has seen many spectacular sights in the 60 years of her reign, but never anything quite such as this on the Thames.